Long ago, beyond rolling green hills and quiet rivers, there stood the peaceful kingdom of Eldoria. Its stone castles reached toward the clouds. Its villages rested among golden wheat fields, and ancient forests stretched farther than anyone could remember. The people believed that every traveler carried a story, and every promise held the power to shape the future. One autumn afternoon, Prince Adrian rode into the royal forest with a small hunting party. The young prince was known throughout the kingdom for his courage and curiosity. Unlike many nobles, he loved wandering beyond the palace walls, eager to see the lives of ordinary people. The morning had been bright and warm, with golden sunlight filtering through the tall oak trees. Birds sang from the branches, and deer moved quietly through the undergrowth. It seemed like the perfect day for a peaceful ride. But as the hours passed, dark clouds gathered above the forest. A cold wind swept through the trees, carrying the scent of rain. The cheerful songs of the birds faded into silence, and the forest grew strangely still. Then the storm arrived. Rain poured from the sky in heavy sheets, drumming against leaves and turning the narrow woodland paths into streams of mud. Thunder rolled across the hills, and flashes of lightning briefly illuminated the ancient trees. Prince Adrian urged his horse forward, hoping to find the rest of his companions. Yet every trail looked the same beneath the rain. The voices of the hunters disappeared into the distance, until only the sound of falling water remained. For the first time that day, the prince realized he was alone. His fine blue cloak was soaked through, and droplets of rain clung to his dark hair. His horse, weary from searching the slippery paths, slowed its pace. Evening was approaching, and the forest seemed larger than ever before. Adrian looked in every direction, searching for smoke, a lantern, or any sign of life. Just as daylight began to fade, he noticed a faint glow shining between the trees. It was warm and steady, unlike the sharp flashes of lightning. Hope returned to his heart. He guided his horse toward the light until he reached a tiny cottage standing beside a narrow stream. Its walls were built from rough gray stone, and its roof was covered with weathered wooden shingles. A small garden rested beside the cottage, though the rain had bent the flowers toward the ground. Thin curls of smoke drifted from the chimney, carrying the comforting scent of burning oak wood. The prince gently knocked on the wooden door. A moment later, it slowly opened. Standing before him was a young woman wearing a simple linen dress beneath a worn brown cloak. Her long chestnut hair was tied loosely behind her shoulders, and despite the storm outside, her calm hazel eyes reflected warmth and kindness. She could not have been more than 18 years old. "Good evening," she said softly. "You look as though the rain has followed you all day." The prince smiled politely, careful not to reveal who he truly was. "I seem to have lost my way," he admitted. "Would it trouble you if I rested here until the storm passes?" Before the young woman could answer, an older man stepped into the doorway. His hands were rough from years of tending the fields, and his clothes showed many careful repairs. Yet his gentle smile made the humble cottage feel more welcoming than any grand palace. "No traveler should face a storm alone," the farmer said. "Please, come inside." Prince Adrian bowed his head in gratitude. "Thank you." The warmth of the cottage surrounded him the moment he stepped across the threshold. A cheerful fire crackled inside a stone fireplace. Shelves carved from old oak held clay bowls, hand-woven baskets, and a few treasured books whose pages had yellowed with age. Everything in the cottage was simple, but everything was cared for with love. The young woman introduced herself. "My name is Elara," she said, "and this is my father." She helped hang the prince's soaked cloak near the fire, while her father prepared a pot of warm vegetable stew. The rich aroma of herbs filled the small room. Soon, Elara placed 3 wooden bowls upon the table. There was only enough bread for a few small slices. The prince noticed her quietly divide the final loaf into equal pieces, making certain everyone received the same amount. She did not hesitate. She did not complain. She simply smiled and offered him one of the pieces. "It isn't much," Elara said gently, But food always tastes better when it's shared. For a moment, Adrian found himself unable to speak. Inside the royal palace, long tables overflowed with roasted meats, fresh fruit, sweet pastries, and sparkling goblets. Yet never had a meal felt as generous as this humble supper. As the rain continued to fall beyond the windows, the three of them spoke about simple things: the changing seasons, the harvest, the forest birds that nested nearby, and the quiet beauty of the stars when the skies were clear. No one asked about riches. No one spoke of titles. For a little while, they were simply three people sharing warmth on a stormy evening. When the rain finally softened and the moon appeared behind drifting clouds, Prince Adrian knew it was time to leave. Outside the cottage, he turned toward Elara and her father. "There is something I should tell you," he said. He reached into his cloak and removed a small silver ring engraved with the royal crest. The farmer's eyes widened. Elara stood silently, surprised. "I am Adrian," he said with a humble smile, "Prince of Eldoria." Neither of them bowed immediately. They were too astonished to move. Finally, the farmer lowered his head. "Your Highness, we had no idea." The prince shook his head kindly. "Tonight, I was not a prince. I was only a traveler who needed help." He looked at Elara. "You gave a stranger your last loaf of bread without asking for anything in return. Kindness like yours is rarer than gold." The storm clouds drifted apart, revealing a sky filled with bright stars. Before mounting his horse, Adrian spoke words that neither he nor Elara would ever forget. "If the day comes when I wear my father's crown, I will return, not because I owe you a reward, but because kindness like yours should never be forgotten." With one final grateful smile, the young prince rode into the moonlit forest. Elara watched until the sound of hoofbeats faded into the quiet night. She believed the promise was simply a kind farewell from a grateful traveler. Neither of them could imagine that the words spoken beneath the stars would one day change the destiny of an entire kingdom. The seasons turned quietly over the kingdom of Eldoria. Spring covered the valleys with colorful wildflowers. Summer filled the fields with golden wheat. Autumn painted the forests in shades of amber and crimson, while winter wrapped the castles and villages beneath a peaceful blanket of snow. Year after year, life continued its gentle rhythm. In the little cottage beside the forest stream, Elara and her father worked from sunrise until the evening stars appeared. They planted vegetables, gathered firewood, cared for their small flock of chickens, and welcomed every traveler who knocked upon their humble door. Though they possessed little, they never allowed anyone to leave hungry. The memory of the young traveler who had visited during the great storm slowly became a treasured story rather than a recent memory. Sometimes, while sweeping the cottage floor or tending the garden, Elara would smile as she remembered his kindness. She often wondered whether he had safely returned to the palace. But life gave little time for daydreams. Each new season brought another harvest to prepare, another roof to repair, another neighbor to help. Far beyond the quiet village, Prince Adrian carried the weight of growing responsibilities. The cheerful boy who once wandered the forests had become a thoughtful young man. His father, King Aldric, had ruled Eldoria for many peaceful decades. He was respected for his wisdom and fairness, but time had gently slowed his steps, and silver now filled his once dark hair. Prince Adrian spent long hours learning the duties of the crown. He attended meetings with royal advisors. He studied the kingdom's history, laws, and distant alliances. He traveled across villages, listening to farmers, craftsmen, merchants, and shepherds, believing that a ruler should know the lives of the people he hoped to serve. Whenever he visited humble homes, he found himself remembering one particular cottage hidden beside the forest stream. He never forgot the warmth of its fire. He never forgot the simple meal shared by strangers. And above all, he never forgot the promise he had made beneath the stars. One quiet winter morning, the bells of the royal cathedral rang across the capital. Their slow, solemn sound echoed through every street and marketplace. People stopped what they were doing. Shopkeepers closed their doors. Farmers removed their hats. Children stood silently beside their parents. King Aldrich had passed away peacefully during the night. The kingdom entered 40 days of mourning. Black banners hung from the castle towers. Candles burned day and night inside the great cathedral. People traveled from every corner of Eldoria to pay their respects to the king who had guided them through many years of peace. Prince Adrian mourned not only a king, but a beloved father. For many evenings, he walked alone through the palace gardens where they had once spoken about courage, kindness, and the responsibilities of leadership. He remembered his father's favorite words. "A crown is never worn for oneself," King Aldrich often said. "It belongs to every soul who places their trust in the throne." Those words settled deeply within Adrian's heart. At the end of the mourning period, nobles, knights, priests, and citizens gathered inside the grand hall of the castle. Sunlight streamed through towering stained glass windows, filling the chamber with brilliant colors. Ancient banners bearing the royal lion fluttered gently above the crowd. Upon a velvet cushion rested the crown of Eldoria, fashioned from pure gold and adorned with sapphires, emeralds, and a single brilliant diamond. It had been passed from one ruler to the next for centuries. The High Chancellor lifted the crown with both hands. The hall grew perfectly silent. "Prince Adrian of House Eldor," the Chancellor declared, "do you swear to rule with justice, wisdom, mercy, and honor?" "I do," Adrian answered calmly. "Do you swear to protect the weak, uphold the law, and place the good of the kingdom before your own desires?" "I do." Slowly, the ancient crown was placed upon his head. The great bells of the capital began to ring. Trumpets echoed across the palace walls. Outside, thousands of voices filled the city. "Long live King Adrian! Long live the king!" The celebration lasted long into the evening. But when the festivities ended and silence returned to the palace, Adrian walked alone onto the highest balcony, overlooking the sleeping kingdom. The moon hung above the rooftops, just as it had on the rainy night years before. He rested his hands upon the cold stone railing. His thoughts drifted back to a tiny cottage hidden among the trees. He remembered warm firelight, fresh bread divided into 3 equal pieces, a gentle smile, and a promise spoken beneath a sky full of stars. Softly, so that only the night wind could hear, the new king whispered, "I have not forgotten." Far away, in the quiet village beside the forest, Elara stood outside her cottage, watching the same moon rise above the trees. She did not know that the young traveler had become king. She did not know that he still remembered her kindness. For now, their lives remained separated by forests, rivers, and royal walls. But destiny had already begun, weaving their paths together once more. Spring returned to the kingdom of Eldoria, bringing fresh blossoms to the palace gardens and filling the countryside with new life. The rivers flowed gently once more, and birds built their nests beneath the castle towers. To the people, it seemed that a new and hopeful era had begun. King Adrian ruled with fairness and patience, just as his father had taught him. Every morning, he welcomed farmers, merchants, craftsmen, and travelers into the great hall, listening carefully to their concerns before making his decisions. The people admired their young king. They spoke of his wisdom. They praised his kindness. But there was one question that echoed through every noble house in the kingdom. When will the king choose his queen? Before long, the royal council gathered inside the Chamber of Crowns. The room was lined with marble columns and tall windows overlooking the capital. Around an ancient oak table sat the kingdom's most powerful advisors, noble lords, and respected ladies. At the head of the table sat King Adrian. Lord Cedric, the oldest member of the council, slowly rose to his feet. "Your Majesty," he began respectfully, "the kingdom prospers under your rule, yet every great kingdom needs a queen." Several council members nodded in agreement. Lady Beatrice unfolded a beautifully painted map. The neighboring kingdoms have already expressed interest in forming an alliance through marriage. She pointed toward distant lands beyond Eldoria's borders. Princess Isabella of Valoria is known for her intelligence. Princess Helena of Norhaven comes from one of the wealthiest royal families, and Princess Sophia of Eastmere would strengthen our eastern alliances. One after another, portraits of elegant princesses were placed upon the table. Each came from noble blood. Each possessed great wealth. Each promised political advantage. King Adrian looked quietly at every portrait. He admired their accomplishments. He respected their families. But his heart remained unmoved. After a long silence, he gently folded his hands. "I thank you for your counsel," he said. "But a queen should be chosen for her character, not for the size of her kingdom." The chamber fell silent. Some advisors exchanged uncertain glances. Lord Cedric cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, love is a beautiful thing, but kingdoms are built upon alliances." Adrian smiled kindly, and alliances built without honesty rarely last. No one answered. The meeting ended with polite bows, but whispers quickly spread through the palace corridors. Some nobles believed the young king was simply delaying the decision. Others quietly wondered whether someone had already captured his heart. That evening, Adrian walked alone through the royal garden. The setting sun painted the sky with soft shades of gold and crimson. As he wandered among blooming roses, his thoughts drifted back to the stormy night many years before. He remembered a humble cottage, a crackling fireplace, 3 simple bowls upon a wooden table, and a young woman who had divided her family's last loaf of bread without hesitation. He smiled to himself. "I gave my word," he whispered. "I intend to keep it." The following morning, Adrian summoned his oldest and most trusted advisor, Sir Rowan. The gray-haired knight had served both King Aldric and his father before him. He was known throughout Eldoria for his loyalty, wisdom, and quiet discretion. When Sir Rowan entered the king's private study, Adrian closed the heavy oak door behind him. "There is something I have never told the council," the king said. He carefully removed the old silver signet ring from a small wooden box resting upon his desk. "I met someone years ago." Sir Rowan listened without interrupting as Adrian told the story of the storm, the lonely cottage, the humble meal, and the promise spoken beneath the stars. When the story ended, the old knight smiled warmly. "So that is why your Majesty has never forgotten that forest." Adrian nodded. "I do not know whether she still lives there. I do not know whether she remembers me, but I cannot ask another to become my queen while a promise remains unfulfilled." Sir Rowan bowed his head. "Then we shall find her." Only a handful of trusted riders were chosen for the journey. The king ordered them to wear plain traveling clothes instead of royal armor so they would not draw attention. No royal banners would fly. No trumpets would announce their arrival. The search would remain a secret. Far away, in the quiet village beside the forest, Elara knew nothing of these events. She spent her days tending the garden, baking fresh bread, and helping neighbors prepare for the coming harvest. To her, the promise made beneath the stars had become a gentle memory from long ago. Sometimes she wondered what had become of the young traveler. Sometimes she imagined he had grown into a kind ruler. Then she would smile softly and return to her work, believing their paths would never cross again. But beyond the distant hills, a small group of riders quietly left the gates of Eldoria Castle. At their head rode King Adrian. The road before him wound toward the ancient forest where one promise still waited to be fulfilled. Neither the king nor the young woman knew that destiny had already begun guiding them toward the same humble cottage once more. The morning sun rose gently above the ancient forest, spreading golden light across the quiet village where Elara had lived all her life. A soft breeze carried the scent of wildflowers through the narrow lanes, while birds welcomed the new day with cheerful songs from the rooftops. For the villagers, it was a morning like any other. For destiny, it was the beginning of something extraordinary. As the first rays of sunlight touched the little stone cottage beside the stream, Elara was already awake. She tied her long chestnut hair behind her shoulders, gathered a woven basket, and stepped into the cool morning air. The vegetable garden was waiting. Rows of carrots, onions, beans, and herbs stretched across the small patch of land beside the cottage. Every plant had been carefully tended with patience and love. Elara watered each row, gently removed weeds, and smiled whenever a butterfly landed among the flowers. She believed that even the smallest living things deserved kindness. After finishing the garden, she carried fresh vegetables into the village square. The market was beginning to awaken. Bakers arranged warm loaves of bread upon wooden shelves. Blacksmiths prepared their tools for another day's work. Children laughed as they chased one another through the narrow streets. Neighbors greeted Elara with warm smiles. "Good morning, Elara. Your vegetables always look wonderful. Thank you for helping my mother yesterday." She answered every greeting with the same gentle kindness. "It was my pleasure." Later that morning, an elderly woman struggled to carry a heavy basket filled with apples. Without hesitation, Elara hurried forward. "Please allow me," she said softly. Together they walked slowly toward the woman's cottage. The grateful widow smiled. "You always seem to appear exactly when someone needs help." Elara laughed quietly. "I simply enjoy making difficult days a little easier." Word of her kindness had spread far beyond the village. Travelers passing through often spoke of the young woman who expected nothing in return for her generosity. Some said she possessed the gentlest heart in the kingdom. Others believed the forest itself smiled whenever she walked beneath its trees. Yet Elara paid little attention to such praise. She believed kindness should never seek a reward. That afternoon, she visited the village school. The small classroom stood beside an old oak tree, where children eagerly gathered each day. Although Elara had never attended a royal academy, she loved reading the few books her father had collected over the years. She often volunteered to teach the younger children their letters, numbers, and stories from the kingdom's history. The children adored her. She made every lesson feel like an adventure. Even the shyest child found courage while learning beside her. As the afternoon faded into evening, Elara returned home, carrying a small basket of fresh bread she had baked for a neighboring family whose father had fallen ill. Her own pantry was nearly empty, but she never measured wealth by what remained on her shelves. Instead, she measured it by what she was able to give. Her father watched proudly from the doorway. "Your mother was just the same," he said with a gentle smile. "She always believed that kindness grows stronger the more we share it." Elara looked toward the quiet forest. "I hope I can live as she did." "You already do," her father replied. Far away, along the winding forest road, King Adrian and his trusted companions continued their quiet journey. They traveled without royal banners or shining armor. To anyone they met, they appeared to be ordinary travelers. Each village they visited brought another question. "Do you know of a small stone cottage beside a stream? Does a young woman named Elara still live here?" Some villagers shook their heads. Others pointed farther into the forest. The search continued. Days passed. The road became narrower. Ancient oak trees stretched high above the travelers, their branches weaving together like the roof of a great cathedral. Birdsong echoed through the peaceful woods. At last, an elderly woodcutter paused beside the road and smiled. "You are looking for the farmer's daughter." Sir Rowan exchanged a hopeful glance with the king. "Yes," Adrian answered. The old man nodded. "Continue along this path until you hear the sound of running water. You will find a little stone cottage. The young woman who lives there has helped nearly everyone in these woods." Adrian's heart beat a little faster. After all these years, she was still there. As evening settled over the forest, warm light from a familiar chimney rose gently into the fading sky. In the distance stood the same little cottage. Its walls were older. Its garden had grown larger, but it remained exactly as Adrian remembered. He stopped his horse and looked at the home where a single act of kindness had changed his life forever. For a long moment, he simply smiled. Tomorrow, he would knock upon that door once again, and a promise made beneath the stars would finally begin to be fulfilled. The first light of dawn spread softly across the ancient forest, painting the leaves with shades of gold. A gentle mist drifted above the quiet stream, and the little stone cottage rested peacefully beneath the towering oak trees. For Elara, it began like every other morning. She opened the wooden shutters and welcomed the fresh morning air into the cottage. The scent of warm bread filled the room as a loaf baked slowly in the stone oven. Outside, birds sang cheerfully among the branches. Nothing seemed unusual. Yet beyond the forest, a small group of travelers rode slowly along the narrow woodland path. At their head was King Adrian, dressed not as a king, but as a simple traveler wearing a weathered brown cloak. Beside him rode Sir Rowan, while the other companions followed quietly behind. As they approached the familiar cottage, Adrian gently slowed his horse. His eyes rested upon the little home where a promise had been born many years before. "It has not changed," he whispered. Sir Rowan smiled. "Some places are too full of kindness to ever lose their beauty." The king dismounted and handed the reins of his horse to one of his companions. For a long moment, he simply stood before the wooden door. Years had passed. Kingdoms had changed. A crown now rested upon his head, though hidden beneath his traveling hood. But his promise remained exactly as it had on that rainy evening. At last, he raised his hand and knocked gently upon the door. A few moments later, it slowly opened. Standing there was Elara. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. She looked at the traveler before her. His face seemed familiar. Older, Visa, yet his warm blue eyes had not changed. Adrian smiled softly. "Good morning." Elara returned the smile. "Good morning. I was wondering." He paused, almost amused by the strange feeling of beginning their story again. If a traveler might rest here for a little while. A look of recognition slowly appeared in Elara's eyes. She studied his face more carefully. Then she laughed quietly. "I believe," she said, "you've asked me that question before." The king smiled. "I have." For a moment, the years seemed to disappear. It was as though the stormy night had happened only yesterday. Elara stepped aside. "Please come in." The cottage was just as Adrian remembered. The same stone fireplace, the same wooden table, the same shelves filled with clay bowls and carefully treasured books. Only now, fresh flowers rested beside the window, and the garden outside had grown even more beautiful. Elara's father looked up from his chair. For a moment, confusion crossed his face. Then recognition filled his eyes. "The traveler." Adrian bowed respectfully. "I've come back." The old farmer smiled warmly. "I always hoped you would." They shared another simple meal together. Fresh bread, warm vegetable soup, herbal tea gathered from the forest. No royal feast had ever felt more welcoming. As they talked, Adrian listened with quiet admiration. Elara had spent the past several years helping neighbors, teaching children, caring for the elderly, and welcoming strangers into her home. She had never become wealthy. She had simply become richer in kindness. Finally, Adrian reached into his cloak. He placed the familiar silver signet ring upon the wooden table. The room grew quiet. Elara looked at the ring, then at the man sitting before her. "You really are." "The king," Adrian finished gently. Neither Elara nor her father spoke for several moments. At last, they both stood and bowed respectfully. But Adrian quickly rose from his chair. "No," he said kindly. "Please, there is no need. You welcomed me into your home long before I wore a crown." The old farmer smiled. "And today, we welcome you for exactly the same reason." The king's eyes reflected quiet gratitude. "I promised I would return, and I have." He looked toward Elara. "There is something more I wish to ask." She waited silently. "When I first came here, I believed I was only receiving shelter from a storm. But over the years, I realized I had found something far more valuable, I found a person whose kindness has never left my heart. He took a slow breath. I have traveled across the kingdom. I have met nobles, scholars, and princesses, but none have shown the generosity you gave to a stranger on a rainy evening. Elara lowered her eyes, humbled by his words. I only did what anyone should do. Adrian smiled, perhaps, but not everyone would have. The morning sunlight poured gently through the cottage windows, filling the room with a warm, golden glow. The king looked into Elara's eyes. I once promised that I would return. Today I ask something far greater. He paused. Will you come to the palace as my honored guest, so that we may learn whether the friendship we began years ago can become something even stronger? The cottage fell completely silent. Outside, the forest breeze stirred the leaves. The stream continued its peaceful song. Elara looked toward her father. The old farmer smiled gently. My daughter, he said, a promise has brought the king back to our door. Only your own heart can decide where the next step leads. Elara turned once more toward Adrian. A gentle smile appeared on her face. I will come. The king's eyes brightened with quiet joy, not because a queen had been found, but because a promise, made beneath a sky full of stars so many years before, had finally been kept. As the sun climbed higher above the forest, the little cottage seemed brighter than ever before. 3 simple horses waited beside the woodland path. A new journey was about to begin, one that would lead from a humble cottage to the grand halls of Eldoria, where kindness, not wealth, or noble birth would soon face its greatest test. The morning after leaving the little cottage, the travelers continued their journey toward the capital of Eldoria. The forest slowly gave way to rolling meadows filled with wildflowers. Gentle rivers reflected the bright blue sky, and distant windmills turned lazily in the summer breeze. Elara had never traveled so far from her village. Every hill revealed a new landscape. Every village they passed seemed larger than the last. Though King Adrian could have ridden ahead, he remained beside her throughout the journey, speaking not as a ruler, but as an old friend. He told stories of the kingdom's history. She shared memories of her childhood beside the forest stream. They laughed together as they remembered the stormy evening when their paths had first crossed. By the 3rd day, the white towers of Eldoria Castle appeared above the horizon. Bathed in the golden light of the afternoon sun, the palace rose proudly above the capital. Its marble walls shimmered like polished ivory. Blue banners fluttered from every tower. Golden domes sparkled beneath the clear sky. Elara stopped her horse. She had never imagined a place so magnificent. It is beautiful, she whispered. Adrian smiled. It is only stone. The people inside are what truly matter. As they entered the capital, citizens lined the streets. Some recognized their king immediately. Others noticed only a group of travelers returning from a long journey. Children waved happily. Shopkeepers bowed respectfully. Musicians played cheerful melodies in the marketplace. At the palace gates, the royal guards immediately knelt before Adrian. Welcome home, Your Majesty. Elara looked at him with quiet surprise. Even after learning he was king, seeing an entire palace bow before him felt almost unreal. The enormous gates slowly opened. Inside waited a world unlike anything she had ever known. Crystal chandeliers hung from painted ceilings. Marble floors reflected the afternoon light. Elegant fountains filled peaceful courtyards. Servants moved silently through long hallways decorated with colorful tapestries and ancient paintings. Everything seemed larger than life. Yet, Adrian noticed Elara's uncertainty. There is no need to be afraid, he said gently. This palace is your home for as long as you wish. She smiled gratefully. I have never owned anything grand. You have always carried something grand within you. Adrian replied. The palace is simply catching up. Later that evening, news spread quickly through the castle. The king had returned, and with him, a village girl. Whispers drifted through every corridor. Who is she? Why has the king brought a commoner to the palace? Could she truly become our queen? Some servants were curious. Others were delighted. But several powerful nobles were deeply troubled. The following morning, Lord Cedric gathered a number of influential council members inside the Chamber of Crowns. Their faces were serious. "This changes everything," one noble muttered. "We expected the king to choose a princess." Lady Beatrice folded her hands. "A queen must understand diplomacy, royal customs, and the responsibilities of the throne. Can a farmer's daughter truly guide an entire kingdom?" Their doubts spread quickly among the court. Adrian listened quietly as each concern was voiced. When the room finally fell silent, he stood. "I understand your fears. No one is asking you to abandon wisdom, but neither should we ignore virtue." He looked around the chamber. "You judge Elara before speaking a single word to her. That is neither fair nor worthy of Eldoria." The nobles lowered their eyes. Even so, uncertainty remained. At last, Lord Cedric rose once more. "Your Majesty," he said respectfully, "perhaps there is a way." Adrian listened. "If the young woman truly possesses the wisdom you believe she has, let her prove it." The room grew quiet. No challenge of strength, no contest of wealth, but three tests. Tests of wisdom, compassion, and leadership. If she succeeds, every noble in this kingdom will gladly accept her as our future queen. Adrian considered the proposal. He knew the council wished to protect the kingdom. He also knew they underestimated the quiet strength of the woman they had never met. Finally, he nodded. "So be it. But the trials shall be fair. They will measure the heart as much as the mind." The council agreed. Word of the 3 royal trials spread throughout the palace before sunset. Servants whispered excitedly in the kitchens. Knights discussed the news in the training yard. Musicians carried the story into the city. Across the kingdom, people began wondering about the mysterious village girl who had captured the king's respect. That evening, Elara stood alone on a palace balcony overlooking the lights of the capital. The city stretched endlessly beneath the stars. She had never imagined standing in such a place. Adrian quietly joined her. "The council has chosen a difficult path," he admitted. "I heard. Are you frightened?" he asked. She looked toward the moon. "A little." Then she smiled. "But every important journey begins with uncertainty. If these trials help your people know my heart, then I will face them gladly." Adrian smiled with quiet admiration. At that moment, he knew the nobles had already made one mistake. They believed they were testing Elara. In truth, the trials would reveal the character of the entire kingdom. Far above the palace, the stars shone peacefully across the night sky, as if quietly waiting to witness the beginning of a remarkable new chapter. The days following Elara's arrival at the palace passed quietly. Although she now lived within the grand walls of Eldoria Castle, she had not forgotten the peaceful rhythm of her village life. Each morning, she awoke before sunrise. She enjoyed walking through the palace gardens while the dew still rested upon the flowers, and the birds welcomed the new day. Many servants greeted her with warm smiles. Unlike most nobles, Elara remembered every name she was told. She thanked the cooks for preparing meals. She spoke kindly with the stable hands. She listened to the gardeners explain the history of the ancient trees. Before long, everyone in the palace noticed something unusual. The village girl treated every person with the same kindness, whether they wore a crown or carried a broom. One afternoon, while Elara helped an elderly maid gather fresh flowers for the royal chapel, 2 young servants whispered nearby. "I thought someone who might become queen would never speak to us." The other smiled. "Neither did I, but she asks about our families, and she always remembers our names." Their quiet conversation reached the ears of the elderly housekeeper. She smiled to herself. "Respect cannot be demanded," she said softly. "It is earned." Meanwhile, inside the Chamber of Crowns, the royal council prepared for the trials that would determine Elara's future. Lord Cedric carefully unrolled 3 ancient scrolls upon the great oak table. Each scroll described one of the royal trials that had tested worthy rulers for generations. The first would measure wisdom. The second would reveal compassion. The third would prove leadership. Every member of the council agreed that no challenge should favor wealth, noble birth, or royal influence. Only character would determine the outcome. King Adrian looked around the chamber. I ask only one thing. The council listened. Whatever happens, the trials must be fair. Lord Cedric bowed respectfully. They shall be. No easier because she is favored, and no harder because she is not. Adrian nodded. That is all I ask. Outside the palace, excitement spread quickly through the capital. Merchants discussed the coming trials while arranging their goods. Children imagined stories about the mysterious village girl. Travelers carried the news into distant towns and villages. Soon the entire kingdom was waiting. Would a humble farmer's daughter truly be worthy of becoming queen? Some believed she would succeed. Others remained doubtful. But everyone wished to know the answer. On the evening before the first trial, Elara sat quietly beside the palace fountain. The water reflected the first stars appearing in the sky. She thought about her father. She wondered how the little cottage beside the forest looked beneath the evening moon. She hoped he was well. A familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. May I join you? She looked up. King Adrian smiled warmly. There is always room. He sat beside her, and for several moments neither of them spoke. The fountain trickled softly between them. Finally, Adrian broke the silence. Tomorrow may not be easy. Elara nodded. I know. Do you regret coming here? She looked toward the moon rising above the palace towers. No. I only hope I can serve your people as faithfully as I served my village. The king smiled. I believe you already have. She laughed quietly. The council may not agree. They do not know you yet. Perhaps. She watched the stars shimmering above the palace. But tomorrow is not about proving that I deserve a crown. Adrian looked at her with curiosity. What is it about? She smiled gently. It is about showing people that kindness is never a weakness. The king remained silent for a moment. Then he said quietly, My father once told me that a ruler's greatest strength is the ability to see the goodness in others. Elara nodded. My father taught me the same lesson. The palace bells rang in the distance, announcing the end of the day. Servants lit hundreds of lanterns throughout the castle. Their warm glow reflected across the marble courtyards like tiny stars upon the earth. The following morning arrived clear and bright. Knights gathered in the palace courtyard. Royal advisors stood beside decorated carriages. Citizens filled the streets outside the castle gates, eager to witness the beginning of the trials. Lord Cedric stepped forward holding the first royal scroll. He raised it before the assembled crowd. The time has come. A hush fell over the courtyard. Elara took a slow, steady breath. She was not dressed in jewels or silk. She wore the same simple cream-colored dress she had brought from her village, along with a light blue cloak gifted by the palace. She wished to face every trial as herself, not as someone pretending to be royal. King Adrian watched proudly from the palace steps. He knew that whatever happened in the days ahead, Elara would remain true to the person she had always been. Lord Cedric carefully broke the wax seal upon the first scroll. Every eye in the courtyard turned toward him. With a calm voice, he began to announce the first royal trial. And so, beneath the bright morning sky of Eldoria, the journey that would decide the future of the kingdom truly began. The morning sun rose over the kingdom of Eldoria, casting a warm golden light across the palace courtyard. Hundreds of citizens had gathered outside the castle gates, eager to witness the beginning of the first royal trial. Nobles stood beneath colorful banners. Knights waited beside their horses. Children climbed onto their parents' shoulders for a better view. The entire kingdom seemed to be holding its breath. At the center of the courtyard stood Lord Cedric, holding the first royal scroll. He slowly opened the ancient parchment. The first royal trial, he announced, is the trial of wisdom. The crowd fell silent. Lord Cedric continued. To the north of the capital lie two neighboring villages, Oakridge and Willowbrook. For more than 20 years, they have lived in constant disagreement. He looked toward Elara. Both villages depend upon the Crystal River, but each believes the other has taken more than its fair share of the water. The dispute has divided neighbors, friends, and even families. Many judges have attempted to bring peace. All have failed. He carefully rolled the scroll closed. Lady Elara, your task is not to choose who is right. Your task is to restore peace. King Adrian stepped forward. You may ask for advice. You may speak with anyone. But no soldiers shall solve this problem. No royal order shall force peace upon the people. The solution must come from your wisdom alone. Elara bowed respectfully. I understand. Within the hour, she departed the palace with Sir Rowan and a small group of royal guards who would serve only as escorts. No banners flew above them. No trumpets announced their arrival. The journey lasted 2 days. As they traveled north, the countryside became greener, and the Crystal River appeared beside the winding road. Its clear waters sparkled beneath the afternoon sun. It was difficult to imagine that something so peaceful had caused so much unhappiness. On the 3rd morning, they reached Oakridge. The village was surrounded by fields of wheat and barley stretching toward the hills. The farmers welcomed Elara politely, but their faces carried years of worry. An elderly farmer named Thomas stepped forward. Our fields dry a little more each summer, he explained. We believe Willowbrook has built barriers along the river. They take the water before it reaches us. His neighbors nodded in agreement. One woman quietly added, My grandfather argued with their grandfather. It has always been this way. Elara listened without interruption. She thanked every farmer for sharing their thoughts. That afternoon, she crossed the stone bridge leading to Willowbrook. Unlike Oakridge, the village depended on fishing and water-powered mills. The steady turning of the mill wheels provided work for nearly every family. There she met an old miller named Edwin. If we allow more water to flow downstream, he said, our mills will stop. Our people will lose their livelihoods. Others gathered around him. Some blamed Oakridge. Others blamed years of dry summers. Everyone believed they were protecting their families. That evening, Elara asked to walk beside the river alone. She wanted to hear something beyond the voices of the villagers. The Crystal River flowed quietly beneath the setting sun. Birds skimmed across its surface. Tall reeds swayed gently in the breeze. For hours, she followed the water upstream. She noticed every bend, every fallen tree, every rocky bank. As twilight approached, she discovered something no one had mentioned. A landslide years earlier had filled part of the river, with large stones and thick layers of mud. The once wide river had become narrow. The water struggled to flow freely. It reached neither village as it once had. Elara smiled softly. The river had not been divided by people. It had first been divided by nature. The next morning, representatives from both villages gathered along the riverbank. Their expressions were tense. They expected another argument. Instead, Elara quietly pointed toward the blocked section of the river. The Crystal River is not choosing one village over another. It is asking for our help. The villagers looked at one another in confusion. She explained what she had discovered. The river has grown weaker. If we continue blaming one another, both villages will continue to suffer. But if we restore the river together, the river will care for both of you. Silence filled the valley. At last, a young fisherman from Willowbrook stepped forward. I will help clear the river. An Oakridge farmer slowly nodded. So will I. Soon another joined. Then another. Within minutes, dozens of villagers stood together where, only hours before, they had stood apart. For 3 days they worked side by side. Strong hands lifted heavy stones. Young men cut away fallen trees. Women prepared meals for the workers. Children gathered smaller branches from the riverbank. Even the elders shared stories of the days before the villages had become enemies. With every passing hour, old anger slowly disappeared. When the final barrier was removed, the Crystal River rushed forward with renewed strength. Fresh water flowed toward Oakridge's thirsty fields. The mills of Willowbrook began turning more smoothly than they had in years. The fishermen smiled as the deeper waters welcomed fish back to the river. Laughter echoed across both riverbanks. That evening, instead of returning to separate villages, everyone gathered beside the crystal river. Long wooden tables were placed beneath the stars. Farmers shared bread. Fishermen offered fresh trout. Children from both villages played together without knowing why their grandparents had once been enemies. Watching quietly from a nearby hill, Sir Rowan turned toward Lord Cedric. "You expected her to choose a side." Lord Cedric slowly shook his head. "No, I expected her to judge." He smiled thoughtfully. Instead, she healed. The following morning, the Royal Council officially declared the first royal trial complete. Before the assembled villagers, Lord Cedric spoke with a voice filled with respect. "Lady Elara, by restoring peace where division had endured for many years, you have passed the trial of wisdom." The villagers applauded. King Adrian's smile was one of quiet pride, not because Elara had won a trial, but because she had reminded an entire kingdom that true wisdom does not seek victory over others. It seeks a path where everyone may walk forward together. As the royal procession began its journey back to the palace, the crystal river flowed peacefully beside the road. Its gentle waters reflected the morning sunlight like liquid silver, and for the first time in many years, the people of Oakridge and Willowbrook looked upon the same river not as something to fight over, but as a gift they would protect together. Several days after returning to the palace, the kingdom was still speaking about the peace Elara had brought to Oakridge and Willowbrook. Merchants carried the story from town to town. Travelers repeated it beside evening campfires. Children played games, pretending to be the village girl who had united two old rivals. Even many of the nobles who had doubted her began to look upon her with new respect. Yet the royal council knew that wisdom alone was not enough to rule a kingdom. A great queen needed compassion just as much as understanding. On a bright autumn morning, the council gathered once again in the palace courtyard. Citizens filled the streets outside the castle, eager to witness the second royal trial. Lord Cedric stepped forward, holding the second ancient scroll. He carefully broke the royal seal. "The second royal trial," he announced, "is the trial of compassion." The courtyard became silent. He continued reading. "In the western hills lies the village of Briar Glen. This year's harvest has failed. The long summer drought has left the fields nearly empty. Many families have little food to carry them through the coming winter." He slowly rolled the scroll closed. "Lady Elara, you have 1 month. You may not use the royal treasury. You may not command the army. You may not raise new taxes. You must find a way to help the people through kindness, wisdom, and the goodwill of the kingdom." Elara bowed respectfully. "I will do everything I can." The journey to Briar Glen took 2 days. When she arrived, the village was quieter than any place she had ever visited. The fields, once filled with golden wheat, now lay dry beneath the autumn sun. The village mill stood still. Smoke rose from only a few chimneys. The people welcomed her politely, but their smiles were faint. An elderly farmer named Martha showed Elara the empty grain store. "This is all that remains," she said softly. "It will not last until spring." Children played nearby, trying to laugh despite their hunger. Parents quietly gave the largest portions of food to the youngest members of their families. No one complained. They simply endured. That evening, Elara gathered the villagers inside the old meeting hall. She listened to every story. One family had healthy sheep but no grain. Another had potatoes but little firewood. A carpenter had strong hands but no work. A widow owned fruit trees that still produced apples, though she could not harvest them alone. As she listened, Elara noticed something important. The village still possessed many gifts. They were simply scattered among different people. The next morning, she proposed an idea. "What if," she said gently, "we stop thinking about what each family lacks and begin thinking about what each family can share?" The villagers looked at one another with quiet curiosity. Elara organized a great harvest exchange. The carpenter repaired broken wagons in return for food. The shepherd shared wool with families who could weave warm blankets. Young people gathered apples for the widow. Blacksmiths repaired farming tools. Hunters shared part of every successful hunt. No coins changed hands, only kindness. Word of the harvest exchange soon spread beyond Briar Glen. Nearby villages heard of the effort. One village sent sacks of barley. Another offered seeds for the next planting season. Beekeepers brought jars of honey. Millers from Oak Ridge, remembering Elara's first trial, volunteered to grind grain without payment. The people of Willowbrook sent fresh fish packed in barrels of salt. Soon the village square became filled with wagons arriving from every direction. The gifts were not commanded by the king. They were offered freely. As winter approached, every family had enough food. Children laughed once more. The village oven baked fresh bread each morning. The old mill turned again. Hope had returned. When the royal council arrived to witness the results, they expected to see a village saved by charity. Instead, they found something much greater. They found neighbors helping neighbors, strangers helping strangers. A community made stronger because people had chosen generosity instead of fear. Lord Cedric walked through the lively marketplace, watching farmers, craftsmen, and children working together. Finally, he turned toward Elara. "You did not simply feed the people," she smiled softly. "No, you reminded them that they already had enough goodness among them to save one another." The old lord slowly nodded. The greatest harvest was never the grain, it was the kindness. That evening, as snowflakes began drifting gently from the sky, the villagers gathered around a great bonfire in the center of Briar Glen. Songs filled the crisp winter air. Children danced around the glowing fire. Families shared warm bread, soup, and stories. Looking at the joyful faces around her, Elara realized that compassion was more than offering help. It was giving people hope. When the royal procession returned to Eldoria Castle, the bells of the capital rang once again. Lord Cedric stood before the gathered crowd and raised the second royal scroll. "Lady Elara, through generosity, humility, and compassion, you have passed the second royal trial." The people cheered loudly. King Adrian smiled, but he knew one challenge still remained. The third and final trial would ask the greatest question of all. Not whether Elara was wise, not whether she was compassionate, but whether she possessed the strength to lead an entire kingdom into the future. As the first snow of winter covered the rooftops of Eldoria, the stars shone brightly above the castle. The final chapter of Elara's journey was about to begin. Winter settled gently over the kingdom of Eldoria. Snow covered the rooftops of the capital like a soft white blanket, while the forests shimmered beneath frost-covered branches. Smoke rose peacefully from village chimneys, and warm lights glowed from cottage windows as families gathered around evening fire. Inside the royal palace, the excitement surrounding Elara's first two victories had begun to fade into quiet anticipation. Only one trial remained. It would be the most important of all. On the first morning of winter, the royal council assembled in the great hall. Nobles, knights, scholars, village elders, and representatives from every corner of Eldoria filled the magnificent chamber. King Adrian sat upon the throne, but his eyes rested not on the crowd. They rested on Elara. Lord Cedric stepped forward carrying the final royal scroll. The ancient parchment was sealed with golden wax bearing the crest of Eldoria. With great care, he broke the seal. "The third royal trial," he announced, "is the trial of leadership." The hall became perfectly silent. Lord Cedric continued, "A ruler must do more than solve problems. A ruler must inspire others. A ruler must unite people with hope." He slowly rolled the scroll open. "Lady Elara, for 1 week, His Majesty will place the daily affairs of the kingdom in your care. The council will observe. The people will judge. You may seek advice, but every decision shall be yours." A quiet murmur spread through the hall. Never before had a village girl been entrusted with such responsibility. Elara bowed respectfully. I accept. The following morning, King Adrian stepped away from the throne and took a seat among the council members. For 7 days, the throne remained empty. Instead of sitting above the people, Elara stood before them. She wished every visitor to feel comfortable speaking freely. From sunrise until sunset, citizens entered the great hall. A shepherd requested help repairing a mountain bridge. A merchant asked permission to open new trade routes. A teacher hoped to build a small school in a distant village. A young blacksmith wanted apprentices to learn his craft. Rather than answering immediately, Elara listened carefully to each person. She asked questions. She encouraged neighbors to work together. When possible, she found solutions that helped more than one village at a time. Soon, people began helping one another without waiting for royal commands. The teacher and blacksmith agreed to train young apprentices together. Merchants offered supplies to rebuild the bridge. Farmers volunteered horses and wagons. Every problem became an opportunity for cooperation. The council watched with growing admiration. Lady Beatrice quietly whispered, "She leads without demanding to be followed." Even Lord Cedric smiled. On the 5th day, an unexpected snowstorm swept across the northern hills. Strong winds blocked several mountain roads, leaving a small village unable to receive food deliveries. Messengers hurried into the palace with the news. Some advisors immediately suggested sending soldiers. Others proposed waiting until the storm passed. Elara remained calm. She unfolded a large map of the kingdom. Then she invited the village elders, merchants, stable masters, and mountain guides into the same room. Together, they planned a safer route through a sheltered valley known only to local shepherds. Within hours, sleds carrying food, blankets, medicine, and firewood began their journey. Volunteers from nearby villages joined the effort. The supplies reached the isolated families before nightfall. No lives were lost. When the storm finally cleared, the grateful villagers sent a simple message to the palace. "Thank you for remembering us." Elara smiled as she folded the letter. No village should ever feel forgotten. By the 7th day, something remarkable had happened. The great hall had become quieter, not because people had stopped caring, but because they had begun solving many problems together before bringing them to the throne. King Adrian looked around the hall with quiet pride. "This," he whispered to Sir Rowan, "is what true leadership looks like. It teaches others to lead as well." That evening, the royal council gathered one final time. Lord Cedric slowly stood before the assembled court. For many years, he had believed noble birth was the greatest qualification for a ruler. Now, his opinion had changed. He faced the people. Then he turned toward Elara. "Lady Elara, you have shown wisdom. You have shown compassion. And now, you have shown leadership." He knelt. One by one, every member of the royal council followed. Soon the entire hall was kneeling before the humble village girl. Not because she had been born into royalty, but because she had earned their respect. King Adrian stepped forward carrying the ancient crown of Eldoria. He smiled warmly. "Years ago, I arrived at a small cottage during a storm. I was welcomed by strangers who shared their last loaf of bread. That night, I made a promise." He looked into Elara's eyes. "Today, I keep it completely." The High Chancellor carefully lifted the royal crown. As the bells of Eldoria rang across the kingdom, the crown was gently placed upon Elara's head. The great hall echoed with joyful applause. Outside the palace, thousands of citizens celebrated together. Church bells rang from every village. Children laughed in the snow. Musicians filled the streets with songs of hope. On that winter afternoon, a farmer's daughter became Queen Elara of Eldoria. Yet when the celebration ended, she asked for only one thing. She wished to visit the little cottage beside the forest where everything had begun. Several days later, King Adrian and Queen Elara rode quietly through the familiar woods. Her father stood waiting outside the old stone cottage. When he saw his daughter wearing the crown, tears of joy filled his eyes. Elara embraced him warmly. I am still your daughter, she whispered, and I always will be. The old farmer smiled. I never wished for you to become a queen. I only wished for you to remain the kind girl your mother raised. She gently squeezed his hand. I have. Years passed. Under the rule of King Adrian and Queen Elara, Eldoria became known as the Kingdom of Open Hearts. No child was denied an education. No traveler was turned away hungry. The rich and the poor were treated with equal respect. Every year, on the anniversary of the Great Storm, the king and queen shared a simple meal of bread and vegetable soup in the little forest cottage. It reminded them that the greatest kingdoms are not built by gold, armies, or grand castles. They are built by kindness, promises faithfully kept, and hearts willing to care for others. And so the story of the king and the poor village girl was told for generations, not as a tale of crowns and palaces, but as a reminder that true royalty begins with compassion. And whenever the stars shone brightly above the quiet forests of Eldoria, people would smile and remember the promise that changed a kingdom forever. Many years passed over the peaceful kingdom of Eldoria. The seasons continued their gentle dance. Spring covered the valleys with blossoms. Summer painted the fields with gold. Autumn filled the forests with crimson leaves. Winter wrapped the kingdom in quiet snow. Under the wise rule of King Adrian and Queen Elara, Eldoria entered an age unlike any in its history. The people no longer measured greatness by wealth alone. They measured it by kindness. Every village built a welcoming house where travelers could rest without fear. Every child, whether born in a castle or a cottage, learned to read and write. Every harvest festival became a celebration shared by rich and poor alike. The kingdom prospered not because it possessed more gold than its neighbors, but because its people trusted one another. True peace had taken root. Each year, on the first evening of autumn, the king and queen quietly left the palace without a royal procession. They traveled through the ancient forest to a place known only to a few. The little stone cottage still stood beside the gentle stream. Its garden bloomed with flowers in every season. The old wooden table remained beside the fireplace. Nothing had been replaced. Nothing had been forgotten. Queen Elara insisted that it remain exactly as it had been on the rainy evening when a lost traveler first knocked upon the door. There, she and Adrian prepared a simple meal together. Fresh bread, warm vegetable soup, herbal tea gathered from the forest. It was the same humble meal that had once been shared with a stranger. To them, it tasted finer than any royal banquet. As they ate, they remembered how a single act of generosity had changed both of their lives. One evening, while the stars sparkled brightly above the forest, a young boy knocked gently upon the cottage door. His clothes were soaked by rain. He had lost his way while traveling with his family. Without hesitation, Elara welcomed him inside. She placed a warm bowl of soup before him. Adrian smiled as he watched. Some traditions were too precious to ever end. When the boy had finished eating, he thanked them with all his heart. He never knew he had shared supper with the king and queen. To him, they were simply two kind strangers. As the rain faded and the night grew calm, the boy continued safely on his journey. Watching him disappear into the moonlit forest, Adrian quietly turned toward Elara. It seems our story has come full circle. She smiled gently. No, our story simply became someone else's beginning. Far above the trees, countless stars filled the sky. Their quiet light reflected upon the little stream beside the cottage. Travelers would later tell stories of that humble home deep within the forest. Some believed it was enchanted. Others believed it was blessed. Those who found it always spoke of the warmth they felt there, though few could explain why. Perhaps it was because kindness leaves its own kind of magic. It asks for nothing in return, yet somehow it always finds its way back. And so, for generations to come, parents told their children the story of the king who never forgot a promise, and the village girl whose simple act of sharing a loaf of bread transformed an entire kingdom. Whenever the evening stars shone brightly above Eldoria, people would remember that the greatest crowns are not forged from gold. They are woven from compassion. The strongest kingdoms are not built by power. They are built by promises faithfully kept. And every great story can begin with one gentle knock upon a humble cottage door.